Hello, today we are going to see how to create a test REST API project and working with the REST parameters and creating new test case and passing the parameters via Groovy code. So let's get started. Today I'm taking a public API deck of cards, which is an open API which works with drawing a card, shuffling the cards, and creating a new deck, and etc. Let's dive into the testing. First, I'm going to create a new REST project. For that, I'm copying this URI. Go to SoapUI, click File, New Soap Project, or we can directly click on this Create a New REST Project icon so that the new REST project pop-up appears where we paste the URL and click OK. Now we see we have created our project where the REST request is present. So first before seeing the functionalities of the API URL, let's see the components in this request tab. The first one is method, where we have the list of options, get, post, put, and delete, which we're gonna see further in our test cases. The second one is the endpoint, which is the URL we created or passed. The other one is the resource and the parameters. Now, the one more thing we can see is the request tab, where here is where we pass the request to hit the server and get back the response in the response tab. The response tab has 4 additional tabs, which is XML, JSON, HTML, and raw tab. So if we see, we have a plus icon to add a parameter to the parameter table. For example, if we click, a parameter will be created. Okay, first look at the scenarios we have in the REST API. Okay, the first scenario is creating a brand new deck. So we all know a deck of cards will be of 54 cards with 4 different diamond, hearts, spade, and clover with the numbers and red and black sets will be there. So there will be total of 52 cards. So this URL will help us to create a new deck with 52 cards. So our first thing is creating REST project with URL. Second, testing the first scenario, that is creating a deck. So this URL will help us to create a new deck. As we see, this endpoint is already been passed. So the rest of the URL needs to be passed under resource tab. So I'm copying this URL and pasting in resource tab. So now I'm sending a URL to create a new deck. Let me run. Under JSON tab, we can see a new deck is created with a unique deck ID with 52 remaining cards. So the success is true. Shuffled is false because we haven't shuffled the cards yet. So this is a new deck created. Okay. So this is our first scenario. So let me add this request to a test case. Right click, add to test case, test suit 1, test case 1, and the request name is new deck. Okay. So now we see a test suit is created, test case is created with the new deck request. So if we run, this request will give us a new deck with 52 cards remaining. Okay. So again, going back to our actual request. So now testing the scenario 2. Shuffle the cards. This scenario will help us to shuffle the existing cards or create a new deck. So if we observe this URL at the end, we are passing the parameters deck count is equal to 1. So what is the deck count here? The deck count indicates how many decks need to be created. For example, in a one deck, we will be having 52 cards. So in two decks, it will be 104 cards. So here we can specify how many decks needs to be created. So as we see, we already have this endpoint present. Now we have to pass API deck new shuffle. Here API deck new is already there. We need to pass shuffle. Okay. At last we have deck count as a parameter. So now we're gonna add a parameter here by clicking a plus icon, giving deck count, and the value is, let's say, 2 decks. So in request tab, we can see we have passed the deck count and the value is 2. The style, here the style plays an important role. So these are the styles we are using. First, let us see the query style. The query style will help us to pass the variable created as a parameter. When you see here, it is automatically appended with a question mark. So now we passed this with value 2. Let's see what the response it is giving. So now if you see, a new deck is again created with 104 cards because we passed the deck count as 2. Let's change the value to 1 and run it again. Now if you see, again a new deck is created with a value 52. Okay. Now let's create a new test step under the same test suite 1, test case 1, give OK, and the request name is draw. Okay. No, sorry. As we have updated the URL here, the same is being reflected in here too. So what we're gonna do, right click on the project, new REST service from the URI. We're gonna paste this and click OK. So now we have two URLs. Let us change this again to creating a new deck without any parameters. So if you observe, there is an option called plain. Plain style will help you to remove the parameter from the URL. For example, when I select plain, it is disabled from the parameters tab because it will be present but it will not be used. That is the meaning of a plain style. So this one will shuffle with the count, right? Okay, now we have created a shuffle step. The third scenario. Okay, third scenario is drawing a card. So we have created a deck with a unique deck ID. From that deck, we are we have to take two cards, one card or any number of cards you want. For that, we are using this URL. Okay, you can either update the URL in the resource tab and check. If not, you can add the URL, newest URI, paste it, click OK. So now it is created draw. So if you see deck of cards, the endpoint, and in resource, there is one thing called deck ID. What is this? It is actually the deck ID created in the response. So we are creating a new deck from which a deck ID will be created. So let us pass this value in the draw request. So how to parameterize this? So let us create a parameter called deck ID, and we are passing the value of this. And so if we are passing that as a parameter, then we can give query so that it will be appended next to the question mark. But we have to pass this in the resource tab. So what we are going to do, we are going to change it to template. So it has created the deck ID with open braces and closed braces. So instead of this deck ID, we are creating a parameter mentioning the value from the previous request and mentioning it as a parameter. Okay. So again, the one more parameter used here is count. So we are mentioning the count as 2, which means it will draw 2 cards from the existing deck. Let us run the request and see the JSON response. So if we see, automatically the value we passed here is being reflected in the response. From this deck, 2 cards are drawn, which is the 7 diamond and 7 clubs, like 2 different random cards. So if you see this, we have created one deck with 52 cards. Now we have drawn 2 cards, right? 2 cards, we're passing the count as 2. So if we see, the remaining cards are 50 because we have drawn 2 cards, right? So in this, we have seen template. So as of now, we have covered query style, template style, and plain style, right? So the last scenario is discarding the card. So how to discard a card? Like, we have drawn 2 cards. We want to discard the card. For that, we are using this URL. So again, let us create a new interface. Okay. So here, if you see the deck ID, like we did in the draw request, again we are passing the deck ID in the same way. See here, let us mention the deck ID. Okay. So cards are, so here we are sending it as a template style. So next one is card. Card, here we are passing the code of the card, which is a king spade. We can either use this, or in the draw request 2 cards are drawn, 7D and 7C. We can either pass this code as well. So let us pass 7D here. Okay, now JSON response. See, the card is discarded, but the count is 50 because we have already drawn two cards 7D and 7C, and we have discarded the card 7D only. So which is discarded from the drawn cards. So the set is still having 50 cards. So let us change the value to king spade, which is not drawn yet. The count is still the same. I'm doubting that. Okay. Okay, now we have created the request for discarding the card. Let us add this to into the test case. Add to test case. Okay. Let me give the name as draw. And add this. Let me give us this card. Okay. Everything. Now we could clearly see we have created a test case with 4 test steps. The first test step will create a new deck. The second one will shuffle. The third one will draw number of cards we mentioned. And the fourth one will discard the card with the code we pass through it. Let us automate this. Let's see. First thing, first one is a plain request which just create a new deck. Simple. And just give us a deck ID in response. This is the key where we need to pass this value in every following request. For example, if we click on the draw, where we manually pass the deck ID here. So instead, we want to take the value from new deck and then pass it to draw request. Let's see how to do it. Okay, now we are created test case with 4 test requests. Now we are going to pass the values via property expansion. So how to do property expansion? We already have a blog in our site in a detailed explanation how to do and work with properties in SoapUI. So let's see. As we already know, to get a value from a property or a variable in SoapUI, we need to do dollar and double braces. Inside this, we're going to mention from which variable we are going to take the value. For example, from new deck test request, we are going to take the value. So mention new deck. From new text response. So from new deck test request and it's from its response, we're gonna take which value? We're gonna take ID. So again dollar take ID. So this property expansion will help you to pick the value from the response of new deck and pass it to draw. Let's see how to do it. Okay, inside the value I am mentioning new deck response deck ID. So what this will do, it will take the response from new deck. Let's see. Now we have let's run the new deck fresh. we got 401 MW100P something. This is the deck ID. Let's go to draw and click on execute. When you execute, if you see, also we can see that in draw tab. In draw tab, if you see the deck ID, in place of deck ID, the value passed is this. That is from the response of new deck. You understand? So if you see the response from that particular deck, it has drawn two different cards. One is a spade and two spades. These two cards and the remaining card is 50. You get it? Cool. Okay, now this card. Okay, now we have two parameters here. The one is deck ID and the other one is cards. So the same way like we did in the draw request, we gonna paste the property expansion here in deck ID. So the same thing we are copying and pasting here. Okay. So here in place of cards, what we're gonna do, we have drawn two different cards in the draw request. Okay. So we're gonna pass the first card created in the response of the draw request. Okay. So how to do that? Let's see. Now we're gonna take what? Now we're gonna take from draw test step and from its response we're gonna take what? Code of the card. So basically the code is inside the card, right? Success deck ID or before the card, and card is another element, parent element, and it had its child as code, right? So how to mention that? So card or cards. Let's check the spelling. Okay, it's cards. Cards 0, because cards of 0 is first of the cards, right? Dot code, because the code is present inside the cards. Now inside this card I am pasting this. Okay, let us run this now and see the JSON. Yes, you must add specify cards to add to the file. Okay, we missed the dollar here, right? So let us run it now. Yes, we have discarded the card from the deck ID. So here we just call the property. If you see here in the raw request, we have passed 401 and discard the cards. Cards are like AS, which is created in draw, right? Okay. So automatically through property expansion, we just executed our test request by taking the value from previous test requests responses, right? So let me click and run. See, the test case is passed. Now if you see the deck request, a new deck is created with a different ID, and in draw if you see the same ID is reflected, and in the raw tab as well the same ID is called. And in discard, see in draw what are the cards drawn? Again AS and 2S. in discard, the same ID is being called and AS is called, right? Thank you. For more detailed explanation, you can check my blog, which I mentioned in the description below. Thank you.